through each layer of this journey, through the feeling of being unloved, through the shadows we deny, through the wounds that ache, through the inner love we seek, through solitude that refines us, through the archetypes that move within, and through the synchronicities that beckon us forward, we come to understand that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. We are not merely reacting to the world, we are in sacred dialogue with it. The longing to be loved, the pain of separation, the symbols that rise in dreams, the quiet guidance of the soul, all are threads of the same great pattern pulling us toward wholeness. To walk this path is to awaken, to become conscious of what we carry, what we reject, what we are called to become. It is not the absence of pain that marks the awakened life, but the presence of meaning. In the depths of despair, in the silence of solitude, in the strange twists of fate, we are being shaped. When we stop chasing the world's approval and begin listening to the voice within, we return to our true axis. And from that center, we begin to love, not as a need, but as a truth. Not as something to receive, but something to become. This is the path forward. Not outward into illusion, but inward into self. Not in pursuit of validation, but in the unfolding of individuation. And as we embrace this path, one step at a time, we find that the world does not withhold love from us. It mirrors the love we have remembered within ourselves. When you feel unloved, it is not the world that has abandoned you. It is a signal from within, a cry from the parts of yourself you have yet to meet. You search the eyes of others for a reflection, but their gaze will never show you what you refuse to see in your own. You are not unloved. You are unseen, but first you must see yourself. There is a voice inside you, quiet and exiled. It is the child who once asked, "Am I enough?" and never heard an answer. Sit with that voice, hear it, hold it, and know this: it is not weakness that speaks. It is truth long hidden. You were not born to beg for love. You were born to become love. The world teaches you to mold yourself, to earn affection by silencing your soul. But love cannot grow in a lie. What you long for will never come until you walk back into the temple of your own being and dare to light a fire there. In your solitude, do not despair. You are not empty. You are becoming. The seed is buried in darkness before it ever meets the light. Feel the ache. Honor it. But do not let it define you. Instead, let it shape you into something truer, wilder, more whole. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be found by yourself. And when you do, when you meet your own gaze with acceptance, with reverence, you will feel something stir. That is love. Not borrowed, not begged, but born. And the world will feel it too. Because once you find it within, you carry it wherever you go. The feeling of being unloved is one of the most painful and disorienting emotions a person can experience. It strikes at the core of our sense of self-worth and identity. While it is easy to believe that this feeling originates purely from the outside world, from how others treat us, neglect us, or fail to meet our emotional needs, this perspective only touches the surface. Beneath the external circumstances lies a deeper psychological reality. The feeling of being unloved is often a mirror of the inner self, a reflection not of how the world sees us, but of how we see ourselves consciously or unconsciously. When one feels unloved, it is tempting to search for someone or something to blame. We may look at our family, our romantic relationships, our social circles, and conclude that others have failed us. And sometimes they have. But the persistent, chronic sense of being unloved tends to stem from something much older, much more primal. It is the echo of an internal divide. It is not merely that we are unloved. It is that we have not learned to fully love, accept, and integrate parts of ourselves. The rejection we perceive from others often mirrors the rejection we direct inward. This inner rejection becomes a lens through which we interpret reality, coloring even genuine love with suspicion, doubt, or disbelief. From a psychological perspective, the human self is not a single unified entity, but a complex constellation of conscious and unconscious parts. Among these are aspects we proudly identify with, our strengths, our achievements, our socially acceptable qualities. But there are also parts we deny, disown, or repress, our weaknesses, our fears, our shame, and our unmet needs. These rejected parts form what some traditions call the shadow. They do not disappear simply because we have pushed them away. Instead, they linger beneath the surface, influencing our behavior, our self-perception, and our emotional life in subtle and powerful ways. The sense of being unloved often arises when these shadow aspects cry out for recognition. Perhaps we were taught, directly or indirectly, that certain emotions like anger, vulnerability, or neediness were unlovable. Maybe we grew up believing we had to be strong, successful, pleasing, or perfect to deserve affection. So we learned to hide the parts of ourselves that didn't fit that mold. But those hidden parts do not stop existing. They wait in silence, hoping to be acknowledged, and until they are, we carry a persistent inner void, a hunger that no amount of external love can truly satisfy. This is why people sometimes find themselves in relationships where they are, in fact, loved, yet they still feel empty or insecure. It is not that love is absent, but that the internal mirror is cracked. We cannot accept love from others if we have not made peace with ourselves. We may distrust it, sabotage it, or interpret it as conditional, even when it is freely given. The world cannot give us what we refuse to give ourselves. The outer world reflects our inner world, often with uncanny accuracy. Our beliefs about our own worth determine how we perceive the actions of others. A compliment may feel hollow, a neutral silence may feel like rejection. We are trapped not by others, but by the unconscious stories we carry about ourselves. To understand this dynamic more clearly, consider a person who feels fundamentally unlovable. This belief might have formed early in life, perhaps through emotional neglect, inconsistent parenting, or traumatic experiences that left a deep mark. Over time, the belief solidifies. I am not worthy of love unless I meet certain conditions. This person grows up to seek validation, approval, and affection, but always with a hidden fear that it might be taken away. When someone fails to respond as hoped, it triggers the old wound. Not being invited, not being called, not being praised. Each small disappointment becomes evidence that confirms the internal belief. See, I'm not lovable. This is not a rational conclusion, but a deeply emotional one, rooted in the psyche's attempt to make sense of early pain. The mirror metaphor is especially powerful because it implies reflection and projection. We often project onto others the feelings we have not made conscious in ourselves. If we carry unhealed shame, we may interpret others' behavior as shaming. If we secretly fear that we are unworthy, we may perceive rejection even where none exists. The people around us become screens onto which we project our inner drama. This does not mean that everyone always treats us well, or that external relationships don't matter, but it does mean that the interpretation of those relationships is often shaped by what lies within us. And until we change the inner narrative, the outer world continues to reflect it back. Healing begins not with demanding love from the world, but with turning inward to examine the relationship we have with ourselves. What parts of you do you still hide? What emotions are you afraid to feel? What do you believe you must become to be worthy of love? These are not easy questions, and the answers are rarely comfortable, but they are necessary. The feeling of being unloved is not just a problem to be fixed, it is an invitation to deeper self-awareness. It asks you to reclaim the parts of yourself that were exiled, to recognize that worth is not something to be earned through perfection, but something to be remembered through presence and authenticity. True love, lasting, nourishing, healing love, can only exist when it flows in both directions. That means receiving it from others, yes, but also offering it to yourself. It means speaking gently to the frightened parts of your mind. It means holding space for your pain without trying to hide it. It means becoming a safe place for your own soul. When you do this, the external world may still shift and change, people may still come and go, but you will carry within you an unwavering center. A quiet knowing that you are worthy of love simply because you exist. And as this inner transformation takes root, something remarkable happens. The world begins to mirror it. People respond differently. You are drawn to healthier relationships. You feel more at ease, less desperate, more open. The love that once seemed absent reveals itself, not because the world changed, but because your perception did. The mirror cleared, and what you saw reflected back was no longer absence, but presence. No longer rejection, but recognition. The feeling of being unloved begins to dissolve, not through external validation, but through the quiet, courageous act of loving yourself first. The shadow is not an enemy. It is a companion that walks just behind us, always present but often ignored. It is made up of everything we push away in order to survive, to be accepted, to be loved. From childhood, we are taught both subtly and overtly what is acceptable and what is not, what makes us good and what makes us bad. In this process, anything that doesn't fit the desired image is tucked away into the unconscious. But these parts do not disappear. They become the shadow, the rejected truths of our being. Many people misunderstand the nature of the shadow. They think it is only composed of our darker impulses, anger, jealousy, selfishness, lust. But it also holds our forgotten gifts, our unexpressed creativity, our silenced voice, and our repressed strength. It is not merely the repository of what society deems a bad, but of everything that could not find expression in our conscious self. What makes the shadow difficult to engage with is not its darkness per se, but its honesty. It holds the truths we have not been ready to accept. These truths are inconvenient. They disrupt the neat stories we tell ourselves. You may believe you are always kind, always calm, always moral, but the shadow may hold rage, envy, and cruelty, not because you are inherently bad, but because you are human. These elements exist in all of us, and denying them does not erase them. It only gives them power to act from behind the curtain. Repressed emotions and unacknowledged drives find their way into your life, not as choices but as compulsions. They leak out in passive-aggressive comments and sabotage, in projections, in relationships that repeat the same painful patterns. This is why people sometimes lash out when they intend to be understanding, or retreat when they most want connection. The shadow, unacknowledged, operates autonomously. It does not ask for permission to influence behavior, it simply does. What has not been made conscious will be lived out as fate. You'll wonder why things keep happening to you, when in fact they may be happening through you. And paradoxically, this is what makes true connection possible. Real love does not seek the ideal, it seeks the real, and the real includes everything you are, light and dark, beauty and pain, clarity and confusion. So the shadow, far from being a burden, becomes a guide, a teacher, a door. It leads you back to the self you abandoned in order to survive. And when you walk through that door, you do not find a monster. You find a forgotten version of yourself, waiting to be welcomed home. Because until you embrace the shadow, until you turn inward and acknowledge what was left behind, the outer world will continue to reflect the inner one. And the feeling of being unloved will remain. Not because love is absent, but because you have not made peace with yourself. The outer world reflects our inner world, often with uncanny accuracy. Pain is not the enemy, it is the messenger. It comes uninvited, often shattering what we thought was stable, relationships, identities, dreams, even our sense of who we are. In those moments when we are hurting, when something we loved has fallen apart or someone we trusted has turned away, it feels like the darkness has won. The instinct is to resist it, to escape, to distract ourselves or numb the sensation. But what if instead of running from the wound, we turn toward it? What if the very place we feel broken is also the doorway to our becoming? There is a profound paradox in the human psyche. The deeper the wound, the greater the opportunity for growth. If we are willing to engage with it consciously, when life breaks us open, it removes our masks. It strips away the false sense of control. It leaves us raw and unguarded. And while this vulnerability is excruciating, it is also pure. In that moment, there is nothing left to hide behind. We meet ourselves not as we pretend to be, but as we truly are. It is here, in this exposed state, that transformation becomes possible. A wound can take many forms. The betrayal that shatters our trust, the failure that ruins a long-held dream, the abandonment that reawakens childhood fears, the illness that rewrites the rules of our body and life. These experiences create ruptures in the psyche. They force us into unknown territory. But it is often within this very rupture that something sacred emerges, a flicker of light, not from outside, but from deep within. The light does not bypass the pain. It moves through it. The wound becomes a portal. This is not a romanticization of suffering. Pain is real. It can fracture us in ways that take years to heal. But the truth is that pain alone does not transform us. What transforms us is what we do with it. If we run, suppress, or deny, the pain calcifies into bitterness, cynicism, or numbness. But if we sit with it, listen to it, let it speak, something remarkable happens. We begin to see the hidden meanings beneath the surface. The betrayal teaches us boundaries. The failure births humility. The abandonment teaches self-trust. The illness slows us down enough to hear the deeper rhythms of our life. The wound becomes a teacher, not because the pain is noble, but because the psyche is adaptive and intelligent. It knows how to survive, but more than that, it knows how to evolve, and it uses everything, including pain, as material for growth. When we allow the wound to speak, we hear parts of ourselves we've silenced for years, a sadness we never fully grieved, a need we learned to ignore, a longing we were told was too much. These truths don't appear all at once. They surface slowly like forgotten memories rising from deep water. But when they do, they bring clarity and self-understanding. Sometimes the wound is ancestral. It lives in the body, passed down through generations. Trauma unspoken, grief unexpressed, fear inherited like an unacknowledged heirloom. We carry these wounds not just as individuals, but as members of families, cultures, and history. Healing them requires not only personal work, but a deep sense of compassion for the larger stories we are part of. When we approach these inherited wounds with presence and respect, we do not only free ourselves, we change the pattern for those who come after us. In every wound, there is an invitation to pause, to question, to reevaluate. Pain makes us stop. It breaks the momentum of unconscious living. In its silence, we begin to ask, what do I truly value? What have I been avoiding? What part of me have I neglected? These questions are not intellectual. They are existential. They pull us inward into the heart of our own being. We begin to touch the essence of who we are beneath all the roles we perform. And what we find there is often surprising. Strength we didn't know we had. Depth we didn't know was possible. Sotosase, a voice that sounds like truth. Healing is not about returning to who we were before the wound. It is about becoming someone new. Someone deeper, more honest, more connected. The wound reshapes us not always in the way we wanted, but often in the way we needed. It humbles the ego and opens the heart to openness. It teaches us empathy not as a theory, but as a lived experience. When you've sat with your own darkness, you no longer fear the darkness in others. You recognize it, you hold space for it. You become a carrier of light, not because you have been untouched by pain, but because you have walked through it. This light is not loud or dramatic. It doesn't always show up as joy or inspiration. Sometimes it's just the quiet ability to stay present, to breathe through discomfort, to listen when you want to speak, to forgive when bitterness would be easier. This light is forged in the fire of your own suffering. It's the result of showing up for yourself day after day, even when nothing makes sense. And over time, this quiet light begins to radiate outward. People feel safer around you. They feel seen. Not because you have answers, but because you have depth. Every spiritual tradition has some version of this truth, that the dark night precedes the dawn, that descent is part of the path to ascent. But this is not just a spiritual metaphor. It is a psychological truth. The unconscious speaks in symbols and dreams and emotional patterns. When a wound appears, it often carries symbolic meaning. A broken heart may reflect an inner division. A persistent illness may express unacknowledged grief. To understand these symbols is not to blame ourselves for our pain, but to engage with it on a deeper level. To listen to what it is asking of us. In this way, pain becomes a form of communication. The body speaks, the emotions speak, the dreams speak, but only if we are willing to listen, only if we stop running. It takes courage to sit with a wound, especially in a world that urges constant distraction and performance. But in doing so, we find something rare, authenticity. And from that authenticity arises power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to be fully oneself. And so when the wound appears, let it be a turning point. Not because you wished for it, but because now that it is here, it can become sacred. Let it guide you inward. Let it break open the hardened parts of your heart. Let it teach you to feel again. Let it show you the strength of vulnerability. And know this, healing does not mean the wound disappears. Sometimes it remains like a scar reminding you of your journey, but it no longer defines you. It no longer controls you. It becomes a part of your wholeness, not your brokenness. This is the paradox. The wound that once brought you to your knees becomes the source of your empathy, your wisdom, your strength. It is the place where the light enters, not as a force that rescues you, but as a presence that was waiting inside you all along. The same presence that will guide you into becoming more whole, more human, and more true. Because the feeling of being unloved is not just a problem to be fixed, It is an invitation to deeper self-awareness. It asks you to reclaim the parts of yourself that were exiled, to recognize that worth is not something to be earned through perfection, but something to be remembered through presence and authenticity. Love is a word so frequently spoken, yet so seldom understood in its truest form. We search for it in others, hoping to find that one person, that perfect condition, that moment of recognition that will finally make us feel whole, secure, worthy. The idea that love is something to be attained, something external to chase or win, has been embedded in our culture and psychology so deeply that many live their entire lives seeking it outside themselves. But the search becomes a cycle, one of momentary fulfillment and prolonged emptiness. Because love in its most healing and enduring form cannot begin out there. Love must begin within. To love oneself is not to inflate the ego or to indulge in narcissism. It is a return to wholeness, a recognition of inherent worth, a remembering of the self before the world told us who we had to be. As children, we are born open, radiant, receptive. We do not question our value, we simply are. But as life unfolds, we learn conditions. We internalize messages that say love must be earned, that we must be certain things, beautiful, successful, agreeable, perfect, to deserve care. These messages fracture our relationship with ourselves. We begin to see our worth as conditional, dependent on performance or approval. Over time, this conditional self-love becomes a norm. We learn to be harsh with ourselves, to critique and withhold compassion, to compare and diminish. We look in the mirror and see flaws. We hear our thoughts and judge them. We fail and shame ourselves. All the while, we yearn for someone else to do what we have not yet learned to do, to embrace us fully. But no external love can compensate for an internal absence. Until we turn toward ourselves with the same warmth we seek from others, we will remain in exile from our own hearts and hidden hearts. Loving oneself begins not with grand affirmations or declarations, but with quiet presence. It begins with the willingness to notice, to pause long enough to witness your own pain without rushing to fix it, to feel your sadness without denying it, to honor your anger without fearing it. These moments of self-acknowledgement are acts of profound love. They say, I see you, I won't abandon you. This is the love the inner self longs for. Not perfection, not solutions, but presence leads to understanding. You begin to see why you act the way you do, why you struggle in certain patterns, why you react with fear or withdrawal. And instead of shaming yourself for these responses, you begin to soften. You trace them back to earlier wounds, moments where love was absent or distorted, moments when your needs were unmet, when your truth was denied. Loving yourself is recognizing that these wounds shaped you, but do not define you. That healing does not require erasing the past, but integrating it with care. Self-love is also boundaries. It is saying no to what depletes you and yes to what nourishes you. It is refusing to abandon yourself for the sake of approval or peacekeeping. It is making decisions from alignment rather than fear. This kind of love is not passive or sentimental. It is fierce. It protects what is sacred within you. It asks hard questions. Is this relationship honoring who I am? Is this job aligned with my values? Am I showing up for myself or am I shrinking? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Because without them, we risk betraying ourselves in the name of connection. True self-love does not isolate. It prepares us for deeper connection. When you know how to hold your own emotions, you are less likely to project them onto others. Individuation, the process by which a person becomes truly themselves, does not occur in the hustle of conformity or in the approval of the crowd. It emerges in the quiet, in the stillness, in the sacred space where one stands alone and begins to listen. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the crucible of becoming. It is the fertile ground in which the seeds of authenticity germinate, far from the interference of societal expectations, familial roles, or collective identities. To individuate means to peel away layers that were never truly yours. These layers may be ideas you inherited about success, values shaped by your upbringing, or identities molded to secure belonging. For much of our lives, we are unconsciously shaped by these forces, moving through systems that reward sameness and discourage deviation. But the soul seeks truth, not comfort. And at some point, that inner call becomes impossible to ignore. The familiar roles begin to feel suffocating. The outer life no longer reflects the inner reality. Something must change. And that change cannot come from others. It must arise from within. Solitude is the necessary container for this transformation. It is in solitude begin to discern your own voice from the chorus of others. The inner world becomes audible. Thoughts that were once background noise rise to the surface with clarity. Feelings long suppressed begin to express themselves. Dreams you had forgotten return, timid at first, then boldly. You begin to ask questions you had no time to consider before. Who am I beneath my roles? What do I truly want? What do I believe in, not because I was told to, but because I've come to know it as true? These are not questions with easy answers. They are lived inquiries, and they often lead you into discomfort, because to answer them honestly, you must confront all that is false in your current life. You must admit what you've outgrown, what you've been avoiding, what you've been clinging to out of fear. This confrontation requires courage, for solitude strips away distractions. It does not offer the comfort of validation. It demands presence, patience, and radical honesty. There may be times when solitude feels unbearable, when you are no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. This in-between space, this psychological wilderness, can feel like a death, and in many ways it is. It is the death of the persona, the mask worn to navigate the world. It is the shedding of false selves, and like all deaths, it brings grief. You grieve the identity you thought you had to be. You grieve relationships that no longer align. You grieve the certainty that once anchored you, even if that certainty was limiting. But through that grief, something new is born, a sense of integrity. A life aligned not with expectations, but with essence. Solitude allows this emergence to unfold organically. It is not a forced isolation, but a chosen stillness. It is a turning inward not as an escape, but as an act of deep engagement with the self. In solitude, you begin to see patterns in your behavior, to connect dots between past and present. You begin to understand why certain relationships have repeated themes, why particular triggers activate you, why some dreams persist while others fade. This is self-knowledge not as an intellectual exercise, but as lived experience. And from this knowledge comes power, not power over others, but power to shape your life from a place of authenticity. Creativity often blooms in solitude, not just artistic creativity, but existential creativity, the ability to reimagine your life, to author your own narrative. In the absence of external input, the imagination awakens. New possibilities arise. You begin to feel the stirrings of what could be, the pull of a life more aligned with your inner truth. This is the beginning of individuation. Not the rejection of the world, but the refusal to lose yourself in it. Of course, solitude must be balanced. Prolonged isolation can turn into avoidance, but the kind of solitude that supports individuation is not rooted in fear. It is rooted in reverence. Reverence for the inner life. Reverence for the psyche's ability to guide you if you only listen. It is solitude with purpose, with intention. A period of incubation before re-entry. Because individuation does not mean detachment from others forever. It means re-engaging with the world from a place of wholeness. It means bringing your true self into relationships, into work, into society. Not to conform, but to contribute authentically. As you deepen into solitude, you begin to encounter archetypes within you. The inner child, the critic, the nurturer, the wanderer. These inner figures carry messages, memories, energies that need attention. Some of them have been ignored for years. Others have been dominant. In solitude, you begin to dialogue with them, to integrate them, to see how they've shaped your choices. This inner work is subtle, but profound. It creates coherence. You are no longer fragmented. You no longer live in contradiction. Your outer life begins to reflect your inner truth. And yet this process is not linear. There are setbacks. There are moments when you doubt everything. When you question your path, your worth, your sanity. These moments are not failures. They are thresholds. They ask you to recommit, to return to solitude not as punishment but as medicine. To trust that beneath the uncertainty is a deeper clarity emerging. Over time, something shifts. The solitude that once felt heavy becomes a sanctuary. You begin to crave it, not out of avoidance, but because it is where you feel most connected. Not to ego, not to ambition, but to being. You begin to move through life with more discernment. You say yes and no with greater clarity. You engage with others not from need, but from choice. Your relationships deepen, not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've come to accept yourself. There is less projection, less expectation. You allow others to be who they are because you no longer need them to complete you. This is the gift of solitude. It restores the sacred relationship with the self. It brings you home. It teaches you that you are not a problem to be fixed, but a mystery to be lived. That your worth is not dependent on productivity or popularity, but on presence. That your path may not look like anyone else's, and that is not only acceptable, it is necessary. Because only by walking your own path can you offer your true self to the world. And in this truth, the wound that once seemed like a cruel affliction is now understood as the point of transformation. The solitude that once felt like exile is now experienced as return. The healing that began with pain has now ripened into purpose. And you come to see what you had always longed for, what you thought would be given by another, was within you all along. Because love must begin within. Every human life unfolds not merely as a collection of random experiences, but as a dance between deeper psychic forces that have existed long before the individual's self came into being. These forces, subtle yet powerful, are the archetypes, primordial patterns of thought and behavior rooted deep within the collective unconscious. They are not inventions of the mind, but structures within it. Though invisible, they shape the visible world. They whisper through our dreams, animate our fears, ignite our desires, and speak through the roles we unconsciously step into as we move through life. The archetypes are universal, yet deeply personal. They take on form and meaning within each individual's psyche, but their essence transcends the personal. The mother, the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the child. These are not just mythic figures from ancient stories. They are living energies within the psyche, organizing how we perceive ourselves and the world. They rise to the surface when the moment calls for them, often without our awareness. In times of challenge, we might feel the hero awaken within us. In moments of vulnerability, the inner child may cry out. When we feel betrayed or manipulated, it might be the trickster archetype we are encountering in another, or in ourselves. We do not choose the archetypes. They choose us. They arise spontaneously in dreams, in emotional patterns, in life situations that seem to repeat themselves. They animate the way we behave, the personas we adopt, and the projections we cast. When someone triggers a deep emotional response in us, love, admiration, rage, or fear, it is often not the person themselves we are reacting to, but the archetype they represent. We fall in love not with a stranger, but with the projection of the lover archetype. We fear the boss not as an individual, but as the embodiment of the tyrant or the punisher. The archetypes are mirrors, and they reflect not only what we see, but who we are becoming. To become conscious of the archetypes is not to deny them, but to enter into relationship with them. The goal is not to be free of them, for that is impossible, but to know when they are active and how they shape our choices. The unconscious influence of an archetype can lead us to repeat patterns that keep us stuck. But the conscious relationship with an archetype transforms it into a guide. The hero, when unconscious, may become reckless, chasing battles for the sake of proving worth. But when understood, the hero becomes the part of us that seeks growth, that faces fear, that endures. The mother archetype, when unexamined, may smother or control. But when integrated, she becomes the nurturer, the provider of unconditional support. Each archetype has a light and a shadow. The light is what we consciously admire, the wisdom of the sage, the courage of the warrior, the devotion of the lover. The shadow is what we deny or fear, the arrogance of the sage, the violence of the warrior, the obsession of the lover. To individuate, to become whole, we must confront both. We must see that the same energy that drives our highest ideals can also manifest in our most destructive impulses. This confrontation is not comfortable. It asks us to own parts of ourselves we have disowned. It asks us to look at the stories we live by and ask, whose script is this? The archetypes play out not only internally but collectively. Societies too are shaped by them. Wars, revolutions, renaissances, these are not just political events. They are expressions of archetypal energies. A culture may be under the sway of the warrior archetype, obsessed with domination and victory. Another may be lost in the dream of the eternal child. refusing responsibility. These collective dynamics influence our personal journeys. To awaken to them is to see that we are part of a larger psychic drama, one that stretches across history, myth, and time. But the archetypes do not demand that we be passive participants. They invite us into dialogue. Through dreams, symbols, art, and imagination, we can enter into communication with them. When a particular image recurs in your dreams, a serpent, a cave, a masked figure, it is often the archetype knocking, not to haunt you, but to teach you. These images are not literal, they are symbolic, and their meanings are not given, but discovered. This discovery process is deeply personal. What the serpent means for you may differ from what it means for another, but the energy behind it, the archetypal power, is shared. To work with archetypes is to awaken the inner myth. Life stops being a sequence of events and begins to feel like a story with depth and mystery. Challenges become rites of passage. Failures become descents into the underworld, necessary for transformation. Encounters with others become meetings of characters in your mythic narrative. This shift does not make life easier, but it makes it meaningful. Even suffering takes on a new light when seen through the archetypal lens. It becomes part of the journey, not its end. There is a danger in over-identifying with an archetype. To believe you are only the hero, or only the martyr, or only the sage is to become trapped. The goal is not to become the archetype, but to allow it to express through you when appropriate, then to let it go. Wholeness requires flexibility. A wise person knows when to act with strength and when to surrender. A true nurturer knows when to give and when to withhold. Integration means holding the opposites, not eliminating one for the other. And this balance is discovered in the ongoing interplay between the conscious and unconscious self. Archetypes also appear through projection, when we attribute our inner energies to someone else. We might fall in love with someone because they reflect the lover within us that we have not yet embraced. We might resent someone because they carry the power we have disowned. By recognizing these projections, we can reclaim what we've given away. We can see that the qualities we admire or despise in others are reflections of what lies dormant or active within us. This recognition is both humbling and empowering. It dissolves the illusion of separation and brings us back to ourselves. And yet the work of archetypal integration is not a solitary task. While solitude is necessary for inner reflection, the full flowering of the archetypal journey often unfolds in relationship. It is through love, through conflict, through shared struggle that we meet parts of ourselves we could not reach alone. The lover teaches us vulnerability. The rival reveals our ambition. The mentor evokes our wisdom. Others are not obstacles to individuation. They are its mirrors. But even as relationships deepen our understanding, the foundation remains within. It is only when we know our own inner cast of characters that we can navigate the outer drama with grace. The more conscious we become of the archetypes at play, the less controlled we are by them, and the more able we are to live from choice rather than compulsion. We are no longer puppets of the psyche. We are participants in its unfolding. And in this process, something extraordinary happens. The outer world begins to shift, not because it has changed, but because we have. Our interactions take on a different quality. Our dreams begin to speak with more clarity. We begin to live with intention, not habit. And we realize that all along, the journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who we already are, beneath the roles, beneath the masks, beneath the expectations. We are the vessel through which these archetypes move, but we are not bound to them. We are the authors of our becoming, and that becoming begins always where the inner truth calls us home, in the love that must begin within. There are moments in life that defy logic. Coincidences so precise, encounters so timely, patterns so meaningful, they leave us with a quiet sense that something more is unfolding beneath the surface of everyday events. These are not just chance happenings. They carry a feeling of depth, as though the outer world is responding to the stirrings of the inner one. These are experiences of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal a deeper order at work. They are not cause and effect, but symbolic alignments, constellations of psyche and matter, moments where the invisible touches the visible and whispers, pay attention. Synchronicity arises when the inner world and the outer world mirror each other. A dream you had the night before plays out in the details of your day. A book falls off a shelf. its words echoing a question you've been silently holding. A stranger speaks the very truth you were afraid to admit. These events, though disconnected by causal chains, are connected by meaning. And meaning, in the symbolic language of the psyche, is never random. It is a signal, one that the conscious mind often misses but the soul never does. These moments tend to appear when we are in a state of openness, transition, or inner intensity. They are most noticeable when we are not numbed by routine or imprisoned by certainty. When the ego softens its grip, the psyche becomes more receptive and synchronicity can enter. It is as though the universe, or something deeper within, waits until we are ready to see, and then reveals itself in fragments of time, chance meetings, and seemingly arbitrary events that pulse with significance. The more tuned in we become to our inner life, the more frequently synchronicity appears. But it is not enough to merely observe synchronicity. Its power lies in what we do with it. These moments are not answers, they are invitations. They ask us to pause, to reflect, to wonder what part of us is being spoken to. A synchronistic event might confirm an inner knowing, or it might challenge us to reconsider our path. Either way, it demands attention. To brush it off as coincidence is to miss the thread. But to cling too tightly, to demand constant signs, is to lose the essence. Synchronicity is delicate, like a ripple on still water. It must be met with presence, not control. Often, synchronicity guides us toward individuation. It can appear when we are at a crossroads, unsure of what step to take, when the conscious mind feels paralyzed by options. At such moments, the unconscious may speak through symbols, signs, and encounters that bypass the linear mind. These signs are not instructions, but reflections of our inner process. When we follow them with discernment, not superstition, we often find ourselves on paths that feel less like choices and more like alignments. We are not imposing our will on life, we are participating in its unfolding. Synchronicity also reveals the interconnectivity of all things. It dismantles the illusion that we are isolated individuals moving through a dead world. In its wake, we sense that the psyche is not locked within us, but permeates everything. We are in dialogue with life, whether we know it or not. What we call the world is not separate from the inner landscape. It is its mirror, its canvas. And so what happens within us affects what we experience outside of us, not in a magical sense, but in a symbolic one. The patterns of thought and feeling we carry shape the way we see and engage with reality. When the psyche shifts, the world seems to respond. This is especially true when we are undergoing inner transformation. As the old self dissolves, as new values emerge, synchronicities may cluster around us, pointing the way forward. These clusters can be subtle or dramatic. They may come as repeated images, recurring numbers, symbols and dreams echoed in waking life. At first, they may seem nonsensical, but over time, a pattern emerges, a story unfolds. And as we begin to follow this story, not as passive readers but as active participants, we find ourselves stepping more fully into our path. However, this path is not always clear. Synchronicity does not provide a map. It offers a compass, a sense of direction, a felt sense of yes, this is the way. This feeling cannot be faked or forced. It emerges from within and is confirmed by the outer world in subtle yet powerful ways. But to follow this compass, we must cultivate a relationship with our intuition. We must learn to trust what resonates, even when it contradicts logic. We must learn to distinguish between projection and guidance, fear and insight. This discernment takes practice, humility, and a willingness to be wrong. Still, synchronicity is not a guarantee of ease. Sometimes it leads us into challenges we would rather avoid, not because we are being punished, but because the soul seeks growth, and growth often comes through difficulty. A synchronistic event might open a door, but what we find on the other side may test us. And yet, if we stay attuned, even these trials will carry the same symbolic thread. We may not understand the meaning at first, but meaning reveals itself in time, and it is in the search for meaning, not its possession, that we grow. It is also important to remember that synchronicity cannot be manufactured. It arises when we are aligned with our deeper self, not when we demand signs, but when we live authentically, when we engage with life sincerely, when we follow what is meaningful. Synchronicity follows. It is not a reward, but a reflection. It shows us we are on the right path, not by confirming our ego's desires, but by resonating with our inner truth. It is less about what we want and more about who we are becoming. As we walk this path forward, guided at times by synchronicity and at other times by silence, we begin to live in rhythm with something greater than the self. Not in submission, but in collaboration. Life becomes less about control and more about coherence. Less about answers, more about attunement. And this attunement draws us closer to the archetypal dimension of experience, where the personal and the universal meet, where inner transformation is echoed by outer alignment. In this state of being, even solitude becomes sacred. The silence between events becomes as meaningful as the events themselves. We begin to see life not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a story to be lived, a story in which every encounter, every challenge, every moment carries the potential for revelation. And it is here, in this unfolding, that the path forward becomes illuminated not by certainty but by presence. Not by prediction but by pattern. Not by force but by flow. And so the more we trust in this process, the less we need to grasp. We no longer chase signs. We live as though the signs are already within us. We walk not in blindness, but in faith. Not faith in external forces to save us, but in the quiet power of the soul to guide us, to reveal what we need when we are ready. We live with our eyes open, not just to what is, but to what wants to become. And in doing so, we find that synchronicity is not rare. It is everywhere. It only waits for us to notice. And in this noticing, in this sacred awareness, we realize something vital. The outer world is not leading us away from ourselves. It is calling us back to the one who has been there all along, because the wound is the place where the light enters.